She was driving home from work when it happened, stopped at a red light. Her husband had texted her something perfectly ordinary, a question about dinner, and she felt a surge of heat rise up from her stomach into her chest, and she screamed at her phone. The light turned green, and she sat there crying. When she got home, she had no words for what had just happened. She just knew the woman in that car was not someone she recognized. If you have had a moment like that, your doctor is probably about to misdiagnose you, and the prescription pad is already out. The truth about menopause rage is something most general practitioners were never taught, and the women living through it are paying for that gap in their marriages, their jobs, and their own sense of who they are. For most of medical history, this thing didn't even have a name. Women in their 40s and 50s who suddenly couldn't stop snapping at their families were told they were depressed, stressed, or going through a midlife crisis. The word rage was nowhere on the symptom checklist, and on most checklists it still isn't. But the clinicians who actually work with menopausal women have started calling it perimenopause rage, and they describe it the way every woman who has felt it describes it. You go from calm to furious in a matter of seconds, often over something genuinely small. A physical heat builds inside your chest that doesn't ease until you've released it somehow, and then the rage drains out of you and leaves you standing in the wreckage of the last 60 seconds, asking yourself what kind of monster you've become. That cycle is so common in menopause communities now that women have started using shorthand for it. They call it the rage, or they call it the snap. A woman in one menopause forum described breaking an electric fan during an outburst with her family and then sitting on the floor sobbing, furious at herself for losing control. Another said she lashed out at her teenage son over something so small she couldn't even remember it an hour later. These women don't have histories of anger, and they don't break things. 2 years earlier, they were the calm one in every room they entered, and now they couldn't tell you who the woman screaming at their family actually is. When they finally book a doctor's appointment and try to describe what is happening, what does the doctor reach for? A depression screening, sometimes a generalized anxiety questionnaire, and almost certainly a prescription for an SSRI. The woman walks out with a diagnosis that doesn't fit and a medication that doesn't address what is actually broken. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists puts the number of women in perimenopause experiencing PMS-like mood symptoms at around 4 in 10, including irritability, low energy, tearfulness, and mood swings. But research that has zeroed in on irritability specifically has found something the standard screening tools completely miss. In some studies, irritability is the primary mood complaint in up to 70% of perimenopausal women, well ahead of sadness or crying spells, and nowhere near the top of any depression questionnaire your doctor is going to hand you. So why is depression still the default diagnosis? Why is anger the symptom nobody screens for? To get to the answer, you have to understand what nobody taught you about your own brain. You have been told your whole life that estrogen is the hormone that controls your period and your fertility. That is true, but it is a wildly incomplete picture of what estrogen actually does. Estrogen receptors are scattered across the brain, sitting in the regions that control emotion, memory, threat detection, and impulse control. Estrogen helps your brain produce serotonin, which is the same neurotransmitter most antidepressants are designed to target. It modifies your endorphins, the chemicals that take the edge off pain and stress. It influences your dopamine, which drives reward and motivation. Calling estrogen a sex hormone is like calling your car a thing with a steering wheel. Technically accurate, almost completely beside the point. Then there is progesterone, which breaks down inside your body into a compound called allopregnanolone, and that compound acts on the exact same brain receptors as Xanax and Valium, the GABA receptors which form the calming system of your brain. Progesterone is, in plain biochemical terms, your built-in anti-anxiety medication, which is the reason many women describe their pre-period selves as the most tightly wound version of themselves. When progesterone drops, your calming buffer drops with it. Now think about the chemistry of an average week in perimenopause. Progesterone declines first, sometimes years before estrogen starts to fall, so you lose the built-in calm before you've even noticed anything is wrong. Then estrogen begins swinging wildly up one week, crashing the next, swinging back up the week after that. Your serotonin production is on a roller coaster, your dopamine signaling gets erratic, and the GABA buffer that used to absorb daily stress has quietly collapsed. The parts of your brain that control impulse, emotion, and threat response are all running on a power supply that flickers on and off without warning. This isn't you being crazy. This is someone yanking the wiring out of your brain's calm down system while cranking up the stress circuits, then sending you back into your normal life and expecting you to behave like the woman you were 2 years ago. The thing nobody tells you about this biology is that the destabilization isn't being caused by low hormones. The damage comes from the swings. Postmenopausal women whose hormones have eventually settled at a low but steady baseline often report that their mood stabilizes again. The rage years are the swing years. The chaos lives inside the transition itself, not the destination. Hold that biology in your head and walk back into the doctor's office with the woman from the opening. She tries to describe what is happening, says she loses her temper over nothing, doesn't recognize herself, feels like she is about to burst out of her skin. The doctor sees a woman in her late 40s presenting with mood instability and does what she was trained to do. She screens for depression. She offers an SSRI. And in some women, the SSRI helps. But in many women, it flattens them without ever addressing the underlying problem, because the underlying problem is a hormone-driven neurochemical storm, not a serotonin deficiency. No antidepressant on earth is going to stabilize a system whose calming buffer has collapsed. If you have ever felt like your medication didn't quite work, like you were still angry but now also numb on top of it, this is why you were medicated for the wrong condition. If this video is giving you language for something you've been carrying around without words, hit subscribe. This channel is a community of women going through this together, refusing to face it alone. I cover the things doctors don't say out loud every week. I want to be careful here. Depression in perimenopause is real, and for some women, it is severe. Women in the menopausal transition are several times more likely to score high on depression scales than premenopausal women, and in one well-known long-term study, around a quarter of women with no prior history of depression developed a depressive disorder during this stage of life. That number deserves respect, and for women in genuine depression, antidepressants can be life-saving. The problem is not that depression doesn't exist in perimenopause. The problem is that depression has become the catch-all label for any mood symptom in a woman over 40, when what is often happening is something the medical system has no clean diagnostic category for yet. A hormone-driven irritability, the kind women have nicknamed the rage, the neurochemical equivalent of someone unplugging your nervous system while you're still trying to use it to live your life. And the consequences of getting this wrong, of treating a hormonal storm as a mood disorder year after year, are not small. They show up in places nobody connects back to the misdiagnosis. One UK survey of over 1,000 menopausal women found that 73% of them blamed menopause for the breakdown of their marriage. 2/3 said arguments at home increased dramatically during this stage. Half feared that the loss of intimacy that came with menopause would end their relationship entirely. UK divorce statistics now show that the majority of midlife divorces are being initiated by women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is precisely the perimenopausal and menopausal age window. You can read those numbers two ways. The first reading is that menopausal women are finally leaving marriages that should have ended years earlier, and that their tolerance for nonsense has collapsed in a way that is freeing. There is real truth in that. The second reading is harder. Women in the grip of an undiagnosed neurochemical storm are walking out of marriages that might have been worth saving because nobody in the room, not their doctor, not their husband, not even their own internal voice, ever told them that their rage had a biological cause. A woman who thinks she has simply stopped loving her husband makes very different choices than a woman who knows her serotonin and GABA systems have collapsed under the weight of estrogen fluctuations she has no control over. A journalist named Marina Gask, who wrote openly about her menopause in her 50s, said the main thing she remembers about that period is the isolation and the rage. She was disproportionately angry at her husband and at her teenage sons over things they did or didn't do, knew in her bones that her reactions did not match the situations and could not stop them anyway. The phrase she used was, "I couldn't stand to be near my family." This is a woman who loves her family. 2 years earlier, she was the soft place those boys came home to, and now she could not bear to be in the same room as them, and she had no idea why. Multiply Marina's experience by the millions of women going through perimenopause right now, in marriages they built over decades and raising children they adore, and you start to see the quiet catastrophe playing out in midlife households across the world. A catastrophe that has at its biological root a transition the medical system has not bothered to teach its own doctors how to recognize, and the women living through it know something is wrong long before anyone in a white coat does. They describe scrolling Reddit at 3 in the morning, trying to figure out if what is happening to them has a name. They join Facebook groups they would never have admitted to joining a year earlier just to read other women using their language. They start sentences with, "I don't know if anyone else has felt this," and then 100 women in the replies tell them, "Yes, we have, and it has been the most isolating thing in our lives." The pattern is everywhere once you know to look for it. The system that should have caught this is the last system to acknowledge it. This is the part that makes women angry once they learn it, and they have every right to be. The training most general practitioners receive on menopause across their entire medical education adds up, on average, to only a few hours total. Some studies have put the number even lower than that. We are talking about a transition that affects roughly half the human population for years at a time, and the doctors meant to manage it are graduating medical school, never having been told that estrogen modulates serotonin, that progesterone metabolites act on GABA receptors, or that irritability is the primary mood symptom of perimenopause. What they were taught is hot flashes, night sweats, and the safe default of an antidepressant whenever a midlife woman walks in with anything that looks like a mood symptom. So the cycle continues in offices all over the country every single day. A raging woman gets a depression diagnosis, the SSRI partially flattens her, partially numbs her, and her marriage erodes underneath both of them. She starts wondering if she has become a worse person somewhere along the line without noticing, and nowhere in that entire chain of failure does anyone name what is actually happening inside her body. Doctors, Mary Claire Haver, who has built a following precisely by saying the things general practitioners don't, puts it directly. Your mood changes in perimenopause are not a personality flaw, she says, and they are not stress. They are physiology with a long Latin name and a short cultural shadow. Until that physiology is named, no amount of mindfulness will fix what is broken, no amount of journaling will catch up to a collapsing GABA system, and trying very hard to be a calmer person will not regrow the receptors you've lost. So what actually works? Because I am not going to leave you in the rage without a way out. The single most underrated intervention you can give yourself is naming the biology out loud. Women who learn that their rage has a hormonal cause stop hating themselves for it almost immediately. The apologies they used to make to their families, as if they were monsters who needed to atone, get replaced with something closer to explanation. They start treating an episode the way you would treat a fever, as something to manage and ride out, instead of as a verdict on their character. The shame spiral that follows a rage outburst is often as damaging as the rage itself, and removing that shame is the first real treatment most women ever get for any of this. After the naming comes sleep, and this one is non-negotiable. Poor sleep is gasoline on the hormonal fire. Women with chronic sleep disruption are dramatically more likely to develop depression on top of the hormonal storm, and even a few bad nights catastrophically worsen emotional regulation the next day. If night sweats are waking you, if you are bolt upright at 3 in the morning with your heart hammering, that is not a separate symptom from the rage. It is the same hormonal storm robbing you of the one tool your brain has to reset its mood circuits overnight. Treating the sleep is treating the rage. Cooler bedrooms, moisture-wicking sheets, magnesium glycinate at night, no screens past 9. These are not luxuries in perimenopause. They are the difference between a manageable day and a day that ends with you screaming in the car. Sleep handled, the next layer is reducing the inputs that are destabilizing an already destabilized nervous system. Alcohol is the obvious first cut because alcohol disrupts your sleep architecture and your GABA function at the same time, which means it is wrecking two systems already in serious trouble. Many women in menopause forums describe cutting their evening glass of wine and being shocked at how much of their rage simply stopped happening. Blood sugar crashes are the next input to manage because sudden drops in blood glucose mimic and amplify the same threat response your brain is already on the edge of. That means protein at every meal and not skipping breakfast to power through. Caffeine late in the day is the third. None of this is health influencer advice. These are inputs that in a stable hormonal environment, your body could absorb without consequence, but in perimenopause, they tip a system that is already standing on the edge of a cliff. Then there is hormone therapy, which is where the medical system becomes useful again if you can find the right physician. Hormone replacement therapy, when prescribed by a menopause-literate doctor, can stabilize the very fluctuations that are driving the rage. It is not appropriate for every woman, and the decision involves real considerations around personal and family history, including breast cancer history, clotting risk, and the timing of when symptoms started. But for many women in the grip of severe menopausal rage, properly dosed estrogen and progesterone restore the calming buffer the body has lost, and the women who find this kind of care often describe getting their personality back the way you might describe waking from a long fever. The catch is that you have to find the right doctor because the wrong one will do you more harm than good in this conversation. If your current doctor refuses to discuss hormone therapy or tells you you're too young or hands you another SSRI prescription as the answer, that is information about the doctor, not about you. The script that works best is direct and specific. Tell them you are tracking symptoms that cluster around your cycle, that the irritability is the dominant pattern, and that you would like to discuss hormone therapy as an option or be referred to someone who does. Bring a written symptom log if you can. Bring a list of the exact phrases you are hearing in menopause communities. Doctors who actually understand this transition recognize that language instantly. Doctors who don't will look at you like you are reciting horoscope. That reaction is your answer. Find someone else. The menopause specialists and the nurse practitioners who train specifically in this transition do exist. And the difference between one of them and a general practitioner who took 2 hours of menopause training in medical school is the difference between 5 more years of rage and getting yourself back. If you are in a country with a national menopause society, their physician directory is often the fastest route. Word of mouth in menopause communities works too. The women in those groups have spent years finding the doctors who actually listen, and they will tell you. A woman in one of the menopause communities I read described what it felt like to finally walk into an office where the doctor knew. She had spent 4 years thinking she was losing her mind. She had been on 2 different antidepressants, neither of which touched the rage. The new doctor listened for 20 minutes without interrupting, asked her where in her cycle the worst episodes hit, asked about her sleep, asked about her mother's menopause timing, and then said the sentence that broke her open in the parking lot afterward. "We can treat this." She cried in the car for an hour, not from sadness, from something closer to grief for the 4 years she didn't have to spend that way. Within 6 weeks of starting hormone therapy, her family told her she sounded like herself again. She said the strangest part was realizing she had forgotten what herself sounded like. There is something else every woman living through this needs to hear. The rage stage does end. The volcanic mood episodes are most intense in the swing years of perimenopause, but once your hormones settle into a steadier postmenopausal baseline, most women report that the worst of it subsides. The hormones don't come back, but the chaos of the fluctuation finally ends. You are not stuck with the woman who screamed in the car forever. You are stuck with her for a season. That season is measured in years, not in decades, and it is survivable. So the next time you snap at your husband over nothing, or find yourself sitting in a parked car crying about a text message, or standing in your kitchen staring at the wall asking yourself what is wrong with you, remember this. Something is happening to you. That is a transition, not a verdict. Your doctor may not have told you any of this. Your mother may not have told you any of this. The culture you grew up in actively kept this information away from you, but you know it now. And once you know it, you can stop fighting yourself and start treating your actual chemistry instead. If this video gave you language for something you've been carrying around without words, you should subscribe and stay close. This channel is a community of women going through this together, refusing to do it in silence anymore. Next week, I am covering the brain fog symptoms so many women are getting misdiagnosed as early dementia and the simple at-home test that tells the difference between the two. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and I will see you in the next one.